Hi, welcome to the third in the series of how to paint a treescape. Today we're going to be looking at painting the foliage, everything above ground. It's going to be really exciting and there's lots to learn, and I'm going to sort of be condensing it down into two stages, so it'll help you understand the processes that I'm going to be using to create the illusion of lots of lovely foliage and layers of foliage to give us some depth into the painting. So the first thing I'm going to do is remind myself of the photograph and have a look and see what sort of colours we've got in the foliage. So it's an early autumn scene, so there's not an awful lot of orange, there's a little hint of it. So we've got some lovely clean brighter greens or paler greens coming from the top. In the middle with those lovely branches, we've got those darker greens, and then going off into the distance it gets a lot paler, and there's even maybe a little bit of pink in there as well. And also we had the sky, and we're going to be painting the sky at the same time as the foliage. Crazy, I know, but it's going to help us give us some really lovely soft contrasts. It's going to help us with the illusion of depth. Okay, so what's my palette going to look like? I'm going to use a couple of greens, a yellow, a white, and a blue and an orange. That's roughly what I'm going to be using. So I'm going to rely on using the titanium white, which is my favourite white anyway, so I'm going to use that the whole time. The green, or the greens that I'm going to be working with, so this is Jenkins green, and it's a lovely dark bluey green, and I would say it verges on the border of being a little bit dirty, so a little bit muted. So it's quite a realistic green. I love it. Now, if you don't have Jenkins green, you could have sap green, Hooker's green, or you could mix a green using ultramarine and yellow. I don't like to mix greens. I like to get them from the tub because I do so much mixing on the canvas that I don't want to make my job harder for myself. So the second green I'm going to be using is Permanent Green Deep. So this is sort of a bit of an antidote to that darker green. It's still quite a blue green, but it's a lot brighter and has a lot of chrome, a lot of intensity to it. So it's a nice, what I'd call a clean green. If you don't have a Green Deep Permanent, then you could probably use something like Phthalo green. You could also mix a green using a primary blue like a cyan or a cerulean and use a yellow. So I'm going to add to my palette with a yellow as well. So that means I can develop those greens into yellowy greens as well. So it gives me a whole range of greens that I can work with. So the yellow I'm going to be adding to my palette is the Hansa Yellow Opaque. I like my yellows to be opaque, i.e. less see-through. Main reason is because I work on a black, and if you work with very, very transparent colours, then it takes a lot of covering. So if you can go for more of an opaque yellow, an alternative to this would be azo yellow, or maybe even cadmium yellow light. It's a great colour. I'm going to be using an orange. So that's going to give me some of those lovely warmer orange tips to the leaves. And also I'm going to make my pinks from orange. If I add a little bit of white to it, it should pink out a little bit. So my favourite orange is Vivid Red Orange, and this is a Liquitex pigment. All of the other ones have been golden. And this is what I would call an orange. So it's slap bang visually in the middle between yellow and red. So any good orange, so cadmium orange would do as well, just anything that gives you that lovely midway. And if you don't have an orange, you could mix an orange using yellow and a red. And now we need a blue for the sky. So this is manganese blue. So the reason I'm using this is that this is a lot greener. And I also want to use this in some of the leaves. So that's why this is going to be useful. So if you don't have manganese blue, you could use cerulean, you could use cyan. They'll do the job beautifully. So this is golden fluid, so you can hear it. And the Liquitex is a soft body. I like a fluid soft body paint because I work with lots and lots of thin layers. If you're using a medium body, so it's slightly thicker, it's not a problem at all. I just like to have very little texture in my paintings, but really it doesn't matter if you're following along. Look at those lovely colours. I can't tip it up too much because they will run because they're fluid. Look at that. Gorgeous. So we're going to use the same brush that I used in to do the trees. It is, just to remind you, a long-handled flat, about 14 millimeters wide, and it's a synthetic, which means that it's great for acrylics. It means the bristles are quite smooth, and there's a lot of tension on it as well. I'm just going to have a piece of kitchen paper ready as well, because I don't want to have a wet brush. I want to just dab out the excess water as I start. So at this point, I probably make myself a cup of tea or go have a sit down or go get a biscuit. And it's healthy procrastination. That's what I like to say. It's just getting myself into the zone. Even though I've painted 100 million times, I still get the nerves. So I'm just going to take a moment, but not at your expense. So I'm just going to take a moment and get my head into it. And do the same. You've got to be in the right mood to paint. And if it's not there, then you won't paint very well. Okay, let's get started. So I am a big advocate of starting somewhere easy. And normally easy is the sky. We don't have a huge amount of sky in this painting, in this photograph, but we do have a little bit on the left-hand side of the image. So that's where I'm going to start. So I'm going to pick up a little bit of blue. Let me just show you what I'm doing as well. I don't want to just dunk my brush into the paint. I'm going to just take a little bit and just coat the end of my brush. And then pop a little bit on the canvas. Not much, you can barely see it, but then this is the magic bit. I'm going to pop a little bit of white on my brush, and then look, I can mix that on the canvas. Now, you're probably asking yourself, why don't I just mix a light blue? The reason I don't want to do that, and the reason I'm mixing on the canvas, is that, look, I can get lots of different tones of the blue. Light, lighter, slightly darker, and that's going to make the painting look a little bit more painterly and going to make it look a little bit more interesting than just rather a flat blue. So I'm just experimenting with brush marks as well. Notice how I'm holding the brush. I'm holding the brush away from the business end, standing back from the canvas and going back to my palette constantly. I don't want to get too comfortable with one colour. So a little bit of blue, a little bit of white, maybe picking up both of those colours at the same time. Now, I'm just wandering around, trying to stay in the wet area. I appreciate some of this is going to dry, but I can't worry about that. So as I start to come down here, I want to start bringing in some of the foliage. So I'm just going to wipe my brush of the white. I'm going to pick up a little bit of my Jenkins green, just a little, and I'm just going to brush over the edge of the sky. Because what I want, I'm just going to clean that again. So I'm just going to work from the other side as well. I'm going to bring a little bit more sky back in over the foliage. And what I'm doing is I'm just blending those two colours together, attacking it from both sides, a little bit of green, a little bit of sky blue, to create a soft contrast. So a soft contrast is really another way of saying that your colours are blending together. So I often like to think of contrast as stairs. So the step is very small between them two because they have been blended together. So there's not really much of an ending of one colour and an ending of another. So this would be high contrast. And so this is a soft contrast. The colours are blending, and a high contrast is where the colours are hard against each other. So this blending happens a lot when you're working wet in wet. So when you're putting wet acrylic on top of wet acrylic. And this happens a lot when you're putting wet acrylic on top of dry acrylic, because obviously the dry acrylic is not going to mix with the wet acrylic, so you're going to get some hard contrasts. So if you can get the hang of the idea of those two concepts, so blending is a soft contrast and wet on dry is a hard contrast, then I think you can just nail acrylics. I think that's all you need to know. That's the end. No, seriously. I think it really, really helps to think of it in those terms. And that's why I'm going to do this in 2 steps. So my first step I'm doing here is it's going to be blurry. So the contrasts are going to be soft. And the next layer I'm going to do is going to be wet on dry. So it's going to be hard contrasts. There is a fluffy bit in the middle where sometimes when I'm blending, I'm going to be letting there be a little less blend. So I'm not going to work the canvas or the paint as much. And then there's going to be some areas where I try and blend in wet on dry. So I'll take you through it. And then as soon as you grasp the technique for both of those things, you'll be able to nail doing foliage. Okay, so let's return to the canvas. Whilst I've been jibber-jabbering, this will have all dried. So what I'm going to do is I've got a little bit of the sky blue and I'm just going to overlap some of those areas and then start to bring in, essentially I've made that wet, and I'm going to start to bring in some of the foliage colours. So I'm just using the Jenkins green at the moment. I want to blend that in with the sky a bit because I want there to be soft contrast. I'm taking it a little bit further than I need to, because then I'm going to go back over with the blue. So it's given me a lovely ambiguous sort of colour as well. Now remember what I said, this is the first layer. So think blending, blurry, and also think it doesn't matter what happens because I can go back in and change it later. Now the other thing that I'm doing with this layer is, because we painted in the trees first, I'm going around the branches in the trees. So when I'm doing that, is I'm using my brush, using that lovely straight line at the end of the brush to help me, give me crisp edges to the branches. And also I can start to shape them or narrow them down if they're a little bit fat and funky. Okay, so a little bit of sky, a little bit of the green. Now, I don't want to get too comfortable with just one green, so I'm going to add a little bit of yellow. Having a think about how I'm going around the edges of that tree. So getting a little bit of a hard contrast here because things are drying a bit. So I'm just going to go back over. So I just want to keep, particularly where the foliage hits the sky, I want to keep it soft and blended. Okay, let's just go in the corner there. So when I'm being a little bit more precise as well, working in these smaller areas, I'm holding the brush a little bit closer to the business end as well. As I start to feel a little bit more confident about the marks I'm making, I can start moving up the brush. Now, another thing to think about is this is foliage, but I'm not painting every single leaf because life is too short. I'm painting a blurry version of the leaves. So imagine you had no distinct vision of those leaves, i.e. low contrast. So a big blur. And that is what I'm painting with this very first layer. I don't want lots of little marks, not yet. I'm going to create the illusion of the leaves later. But let's put it this way, if it's green and stuck on top of a long vertical browny stick, it's probably going to be leaves. So we don't really need to tell anybody too much. We can just imply. So again, trying to keep it soft and blurry. Keep thinking this layer, blurring, blending the paint, giving us low contrast, i.e. soft edges. Use this layer as your workout layer as well. So if you're not sure what a colour is going to look like, don't spend a load of time just staring at it on the palette, thinking, will that colour be right? Just go stick it on and see if that works. So if we move to the other green, so this is the permanent green deep, look how it changes. How different it is. The hookers. So we don't want there to be a huge jump of colour. Let's just put a little bit of that new green up there. So I keep forgetting to look at the photograph because I'm enjoying myself too much. So it doesn't really matter as long as we get the sort of gist of it. Oh, I'm loving it already. So just put a little bit of green in there. Put a little bit of white. It's supposed to be a bit of blue in there too. So let's try a bit of blue. And then let's just shape that branch. See, look how jaggedy those branches look now as well. I love it. Now up here, we've got dark green. And then we've got this lovely poppy green on top, which is a little bit of that permanent green deep and a little bit of yellow. So actually, to make my job easier, I'm going to pick up both, a little bit of yellow and a little bit of that green at the same time. So just as we did with the trees, if it makes it easier, pick up two colours. Okay. Now, this is a good example of where I'm not over blending, so there's a little bit of contrast here because there's going to be a lot of contrast there later. So to me, though, that's still a soft contrast and it looks nice and scruffy too. Okay, groovy. So let's keep going. So as we go over this side of the tree, my sketch there reminds me that something changes, so it gets being that lovely poppy green. As a rule of thumb, when it comes to the greens, I'm using the Jenkins green for some of the darker greens on the photograph, with a tiny bit of yellow, maybe a little bit of white, and then I'm using the other green, the permanent green light, for those lovely poppy bright greens that come down. I'm just letting the brush dance as well over. Now again, I'm not over blending here, so I'm getting a little bit of a contrast, but at this point, don't be disheartened that the foliage isn't getting as light as you want it to. It's a very good reason for that, and it's called a black underpaint. So don't be tempted to start putting on the paint more thickly. And don't worry too much about going back over to try and make it lighter. Just leave it, this first layer, this blendy layer, this play with it layer, this soft contrast layer is also the dark layer. And we'll go back in with our subsequent layer, our next layer, to create more light. So it's often worth remembering, thinking about acrylics being dark to light, and certainly that is definitely the case when it comes to painting on black. Now, I haven't washed my brush. I'm letting all the colours build up, but once again, I'm not letting the paint go too far up the brush, mainly because I want to keep it quite a tight brush. I don't want it splaying out everywhere. Now, there's some foliage that goes over the tree there. So I've just put that in, using a little bit of yellow and some of the green that's still on my brush. And notice, let's do a little bit more. Yes, a little bit more here. Notice how I'm just moving the brush round in lots of different directions. I'm almost rolling it between my fingers and thumb to make sure I don't get the same mark going in the same direction over and over. So it's about being nice and chaotic, and sometimes it helps to walk around the canvas as well. Really be conscious of your painting position. So keep stepping back from the canvas for starters. That's very important, so you can see how the illusion is developing. Think about how far up the brush you're holding, but also think about whether you're moving your whole arm, just your wrist, from the elbow. It'll all translate to different marks. Just take a moment to see what you're doing and how you're standing. And try and get yourself in a good position so that it's very easy to rock backwards and forwards. So I keep flicking my eyes between the photograph and the canvas. The other thing to note as well is at the moment I'm mainly using my brush perpendicular, i.e. at a right angle to my canvas. Now that's because it helps me use the tip of the brush to push the paint in, so it concentrates all that pressure on that tip of the brush, and that will help me blend the paint together. Now, one thing I've forgotten as I've been talking is there's a little bit of orange around here. So I'm just going to, whilst it's still wet, push a little bit of orange. Maybe I'll pick up a little bit of orange and yellow on my brush at the same time. Just let my brush dance around a bit into the greens. Remember, keep going back to your palette, keep changing your colours to get lots of lovely variety, because that's going to really, really help us with the next layer. So quite a few things to take in there. So let's just recap. This is layer one. So it means you can make mistakes and experiment with your colours, which is really important because you've got to get used to those colours. They might be completely new pigments to you. So find out how they react, how they mix together, how much you need of one, how little of another. And if you feel like you've made a mistake, keep going. Just keep going, because we can change that. We can alter that with the second layer. So first layer, be brave, be loopy, be loose, experiment. The other thing that you're doing is you're blending. So you're letting those colours bleed into each other. by mixing them on the canvas, either blending with a back and forth motion of your paintbrush, or maybe just letting the brush dance around a little bit. It's wet in wet, soft contrasts, blending. And the third thing that you're doing on this first layer is that you're shaping a lot of those branches. So you're slowing yourself down, holding the brush a little bit closer to the brush end, and just twisting the brush in different ways to mold the branches and create different shapes, and maybe even refine them a little bit if they were a little bit clunky when you first painted them. Experimental, blurry, soft contrasts, and shaping. Keep going and aim to cover all of this top area, so these top 2/3, everything that is growing above the ground. Work a small area at a time and keep moving on. Don't fuss over any area. Don't spend too long in one space, and don't worry too much about thinking that they should be individual leaves. It doesn't matter at this point. We are painting a blur. So paint your whole first layer all the way down to the horizon line. So that's all of the foliage above the ground. And then once you're done, you're ready for lesson 4, which is painting the second layer of foliage, which is coming out very soon. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you with the next lesson.